Welcome to Fuel, a NSWC podcast for propelling your leadership journey. I'm Joe Michalak, the Propel Program Manager. Fuel engages with leaders who tell their stories and ask you into their world. So whether you're interested in leadership, what that's all about, or you've been leading for years, we're all on an ongoing professional journey which requires fuel. In this episode, Technical Director Nigel Thijs asks us to consider why we want to lead. Because for him, it's all about people, purpose, and passion. Welcome to the 10th episode of the Fuel Podcast. Rather than me introducing you, one of the things we just discussed, and maybe the audience didn't get to hear, is this is really our first conversation. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Nigel Thijs, I'm the Senior Executive Technical Director at Naval Surface Warfare Center Philadelphia Division. My entire government career has been here at Philadelphia Division, but I was in private industry for about 5 years before that. Yeah, a little bit of moving around as well, which is really what well-rounded me and equipped me for this position.
When I was looking through some of the information about you, it was really easy to tell that you care a lot about professional development, not only for yourself, but for others. That said, investing in yourself as a leader in an ongoing way is still very important. And what I read is that you participated in Bridging the Gap. So can you give us kind of a headline about what Bridging the Gap is, and then maybe describe what that felt like to try to go implement what you learned in that program back in your home role?
Yeah, so Bridging the Gap is a leadership development program. It's open to GS-15 and I think the phrase is high-performing GS-14 across the Department of the Navy that are interested in the potential for a senior executive position. I kind of those in the audience that may know CDPs, Commander Development Programs. It's kind of like a CDP light. Right? You don't have certified ECQs at the end, but it is something that a program where you actually write your ECQs, you have executive sponsored learning projects, et cetera, throughout that year duration of the program. So for me,
quick interruption. Yeah. Some of our audience aren't Navy at all. So what's an ECQ?
An executive core. So an ECQ is an executive core qualification. It's one of the requirements for in the application process and to be selected as a senior executive.
Thanks for letting me interrupt, and I appreciate you clarifying.
Yep, no, not a problem. Yeah. So I actually decided to participate in that program, apply for the program. You have to be selected for it. But I decided because I do value professional development, and it had been some time since I had some formal leadership training and education. I had done some work in certificates at the Naval Postgraduate School. That was more along the lines of acquisition and really just focusing in on leadership itself. It had just been a bunch of time had gone by, and I just hadn't done it. And I'm like, hey, you know what? This is something that's available at my grade level. And so I'm going to go ahead and apply to be in it. I actually did not apply thinking that I wanted to be an SES or anything like that. And so what you learn in that program is really about yourself as a leader. And a 360 analysis was part of the program when I went through it. I believe it still is, but I can only talk to my experience. And then having that 360 done and being evaluated by my boss, my peers, and subordinates was a really good way for me to get that feedback where like, hey, how am I perceived by these different levels in the organization? And taking that feedback on that survey and then navigating through what the program puts you through in terms of leadership development, learning projects, and building those ECQs, it really got me thinking better about how I lead and why I lead. And so I would say that Bridging the Gap was that real first step that made me realize, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not as hard as and it's hard, but maybe it's not as hard as I thought, right? To get an executive package together Now looking at my gaps in 360, what's my plan to kind of close those gaps, my own personal plan? And then how can those things come together to make me competitive for a future senior executive position? Yeah. So I credit that program with putting it on the map for me, because I was not thinking that I wanted to be a senior executive, not for many of the reasons that people give. Oh, you have to work a lot, and you have to come into the office all the time, and all the negatives that people love to throw around, right? It wasn't because of any of those reasons. It was just like, hey, that's just not on my career path, until I realized, you know what? Maybe it should be. I think it's extremely important to be introspective and to self-assess not only your suitability for and readiness for leadership, but also as you lead, right? You're continuously course correcting and evolving. I feel you should be doing that. If you're not doing that, you're probably not doing enough, right? And I don't want to necessarily equate a lack of self-assessment with complacency, but in some ways, it could breed complacency, because the leader has to constantly challenge themselves and their preconceived notions in any variety of scenarios that unfold in front of a leader day to day. That I like to say, I'm sure, Joe, you're familiar with Simon Sinek, right? Start with why, right? Great book, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's in an organizational leadership position or thinking about it. However, I like to say, start with why for yourself. Why do I want to lead, right? And so that self-assessment is really important. A formal 360 is great to reveal blind spots that you might have. But I think it's even more fundamental with that, and starting with why. Why do you want to lead? And then that will help determine if you should lead. I really want to make other leaders, right? Grow other leaders, and decided to quote unquote start over, because obviously my paycheck didn't start over, right? But start over and go into the management track. Typically, people come in 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, and then decide, do I want to stay technical or go management? I stayed in that technical and then kind of restarted as management, because I found out that my why was about leading people. So I think if you've been leading for a while, you need to consider, are you continuing to challenge yourself, right? There's no timeline on leadership. We have branch heads that have been branch heads for 25 years, and that's great. Leadership doesn't mean moving up the pyramid, right? Leadership doesn't mean that you're just the boss for a duration of time, right? Leadership is about leading the people, leading change, and delivering the results that are impactful. And so my advice to leaders that have been leading for a while are to really step back and self-assess.
As I look at NSWC Philadelphia, I see a culture. I can see it by walking in the door. How would you describe that culture, and how do you lead that culture?
Yeah, so like any large organization, right? Our organizational culture is made up of all those diverse inputs from the 2,858 of us at the end of last month that were on board. Leading that culture is, again, about meeting people where they are, and that can be a challenge from my position, right? Because almost 3,000 people, I don't talk to X person on the regular, right? So what I've really learned about being in this position, more so than having been a division head here or department head rotations, is about leading through others, right? So leading first my department heads and meeting more regularly with my management team, and then inspiring them to lead in a similar way with their people, so that we really are people first, creating an organization where people are engaged and thrive, and that improves the output of the products and the services that we deliver on our mission. A lot of times in the Department of Defense, I'll say we talk about mission first, and the mission is always first. However, we don't necessarily place enough emphasis on really valuing and treating our people well. Will actually is a force enabler for executing the mission, right? So sometimes it's really about the messaging, that the messaging can sound people second. Even when we say people are first, people are number one, right? Then the behaviors are mission, 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 right? But really leading from a way where the people are first, and that enabling those people and empowering those people will actually improve the mission. That's the force behind my leadership style, and I've seen results across the years with it and the different organizations that I've led by leading with people first. And I feel that we have started to shift that culture to where we're empowering our people, and that empowerment of our people improves how we meet our mission requirements.
If there's a mental trap to mission first versus people first, what might that be? Because we're all leading, and I think there's great intent in many leaders I talk to all the time. Yet I would also agree with you that I see evidence of what you just described. So what's maybe a trap? You can be first person, or you can just be descriptive. However you want to approach that.
Yeah, so I think a mental trap with mission first is that in a moment of crisis, right? There's a potential for us to default to mission first over the people. And again, I said it just a few moments ago that mission is first. However, we can't get caught in the trap of mission is first to the detriment, exclusion, minimization, disregard for our people.
Yeah, that's really good. You said in crisis, and that made me think of the way we define crisis. I'm sure you're familiar with Stephen Covey's model of urgent and important, and that upper quadrant always being in crisis. How do we avoid the trap of thinking everything is a crisis and then therefore leading in a way that's not people centric?
Yeah. So one of my phrases is, if everything's important, nothing's important. And I can't tell you how many times a year I say that to whatever group is in front of me that is like, hey, everything's on fire, right?
I've got 20 number one priorities.
Right. So it really is about thinking. So now this is where mission helps, right? This is where let's look at those 20 things that are in front of us. What are the biggest impacts to the mission, and working backwards from there, right? The staying out of that crisis zone it's a culmination of a whole host of things. However, it is not just, and I think this is another trap that we can get into, just like preparedness, right? If you prepare, then nothing will go wrong, right? There won't be any, right? But I think sometimes, especially in the technical community, we think that, right? If we have all these plans, right, nothing's going to happen. And then we get so focused on the plans that then it's hard to navigate anything that wasn't written down in the plan, right? So it's about identifying and quantifying and communicating, which is the piece that I'm focusing on with the command here, the risks, right? And then developing mitigation plans for those risks if realized. But not that we're going to plan and drive out all risk completely, because then now we're not agile. We haven't made a decision. We're not actually starting on anything, right? We're just continuing to plan and drive out risk, and and we don't actually move anything forward. So I think that's probably the best way I would respond to how do you stay out of crisis. It is about planning, but it's more about identifying the risks and having plans. So planning from a different standpoint, plans to address those risks when they happen.
So I see there's aspects of you being a transformational leader in what you're describing. And as I just peeked at your vision for 2030, I suspect there's more of that in there. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So, Vision 2030, number one, I want to start with it. It's not my vision. It's our vision. And that's important for me to explicitly say, because it was designed in an offsite this past earlier this year, and it was myself, our commanding officer, our leadership team, but more importantly, I brought in high grades, other employees, other levels of management, and included as well a small number of employees with less than 5 years of service. So it is our vision for the future of the command. Now, obviously, I've briefed it out. I have the logo. It's on social media. It's going to be attached to me, right? Got it. But it really was developed collaboratively with a large team, and it was intentional of me to bring in employees into that rather than leadership doing an offsite and then coming down like Moses from the mountain with, hey, this is our plan, or this is our vision, right? But it is about leading through an uncertain future. Really, it's really about refashioning and rethinking and evolving how we operate and who we are to lead to and through this uncertain future. So it's funny, right? Because one thing as a leader you have to be comfortable with is that you're not going to make everybody happy, right? And so some of the criticism I've heard is, well, we always have learned, or we're agile, or we're innovative. We're a Navy lab, aren't we innovative? And it's like, yes, we are. And right, we have to repackage that and focus that in a new direction. And a great example in the innovation space is, not just responding to fires, but actually eliminating the source of the fire, right? We've got a long, proud history of putting out a lot of fires, right? As an Echelon 5 command, as an Echelon 4 Navy lab, we should be delivering technologies that not only bring new capabilities to the warfighter, but also that we truly solve our problems, we eliminate them, and that we continue to improve holistically across the continuum, right? So it's really about refashioning, learning, agility, and innovation so that we are able to best support the enterprise, the fleet, the Navy through an uncertain future and very, very complex geopolitical and dynamic geopolitical environment.
What is hard about leading, and what makes it all worth it?
That's a great question. So for me, what's hard about it is that you have to make decisions and trade-offs that are the best for the organization, but may not be the best for an organizational unit within the organization or even people within that, right? And so it's not about just letting people down or being liked, but it's hard to see people deal with a sense of loss, right? Because the decision you made doesn't necessarily incorporate their perspective, or sometimes they're not part of that future, right? And they were hoping that they would have been. So I think to me, that's probably the hardest thing, is that as executives, we're counted on to make some hard decisions, and those decisions are not necessarily what your people may want. And sometimes that's because they don't see some of the bigger picture, and it's incumbent on me to explain the decision that was made. And again, sometimes, depending on what it is, in a broader lens, but more often through my other managers, right? And that's the piece that is also hard, and probably the hardest for me personally is, like, I want to, because I am a people person, I want to be able to say, like, hey, this is why, and I can't, right? I need to. If I did, I could, right? But then I'd be working all the time, and my family wouldn't hate me, right? So I have to work through others, and so I have to trust that my message, my reasoning is not changing like the telephone game as it goes down through 3 layers of management, right? And then an employee might hear, this is the reason. It's the same reason I said. Or the next branch over, an employee might hear, yeah, those TDs, they just did that, and boo, everything sucks, right? So that's what makes it hard, is that I would love to connect with and give my message directly to everyone, but I have to trust on others to lead in the same manner, where they're transparent and that they are communicating, strategic intent, or at least front office intent behind those themes. What makes it worth it, though, is again the people, right? It's kind of the 2 sides of the coin, right? That's what makes it hard, but it's also what makes it worth it. One of my core values, it probably wouldn't be a surprise to you, is humanity. I really believe that every single one of us has dignity and worth that they bring to work every day, that they bring to life, right? But I see them through work, and being able to mentor others, be able to grow leaders, to be able to create a culture where I believe that we are evolving to better focus on employees and make Philadelphia Division a better place for people to work. That's what makes it worth it. And when I hear feedback that says, hey, we've seen things evolve, we are seeing things change, it is definitely something that makes it worth it for me. It's just super important. Like you said, you kind of got the theme, that feeling anyway from seeing my posts. But people are the entity that makes us meet our mission. And so it is most important for me to ensure that we are really driving that empowerment and that trust down to and through our people, and those little touch points where people are like, hey, I see where you're going. I see there's an impact that is actually being felt. Are those times that really make it worth it.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Fuel Podcast, brought to you by NSWC's Propel Leadership Development Program. For more information about Propel, visit the Propel Leadership Development SharePoint page. Thanks for adding fuel to propel your journey.